interesting discovery between these two chassis. So I decided we're going to put the 325 jug on a 55 and time it out. And I knew that the 325 has a Fenwick spacer that's about 77 thou underneath the jug, and the 325 piston is about 65.5 thou taller above the pin than a 55 piston. So my assumption was that this was above normal deck height on the 325, and in order to be able to make it work without it, that spacer, we were going to use a 55 height piston. But it turns out that they machined this down to put that spacer on, so that it is at normal deck height, and the inside of this jug is about 93 or 94 thou deeper than a 55 jug. So you try to put a 55 piston in here on a 55 case, you end up with 190 thou squish. Like, the numbers weren't even that bad other than the squish. We were at 100 on the exhaust, 115 on the transfers. That's shorter blowdown that I personally like. And the intake was pretty short at about 65 thou. So now let's put it together with the proper piston and see what we get out of it. So, with the proper piston, we have much more usable numbers. 106 in the exhaust, 122 in the transfers, 65 in the intake. That didn't change because the bottom part of the piston is the same once you get below the pin. And 48.5 thou squish, which is not unexpected for a saw that is stock and still has a base gasket in. So, by all rights, we should get the same numbers with that piston cylinder on the 325 bottom end, but we will double check that, just to be sure. Just like I figured, all of the numbers are the same, so now it's time to put this sucker together and make a saw out of it again. So let's go ahead and put everything together. Interestingly, it didn't want the new ring for a 55, so there must be a difference in the piston as well. But there we go. Let's finish bolting this sucker together. Strange things I'm running into on this. If you've been into some of the Huskies on this chassis, the older ones and the 50, the Johnson Red 590 Partner 5000, they've got an 8mm hex head bolt. If you're used to working on 51s and 55s, you got an Allen bolt. But this Poulan, they're Torx, which is just plain odd. Hopefully I've got something to fit them. Unfortunately, I'm missing one of the original jug bolts, so we're going to be sticking a single Husky one in, but that's kind of irrelevant. Considering how long this thing was apart and what I paid for it, I can deal with a missing bolt or two. This chassis had definitely had its flaws, whereas the 55 did not, and that Fenwick spacer under the jug, that is to try and keep heat away from the fuel tank, because on this chassis, the fuel tank is part of the main casting. So they had quite a few issues with fuel boiling in the tank, and to the point where on this saw, you've got that spacer, and you also have this expansion tank or chamber that the vent runs through. Compared to the Huskies, this chassis definitely had a few weaknesses. One of them they're very known for failure is anti-vibe mounts. This one comes apart pretty bad. The one at the back has issues. And one of the things that I've noticed is the 590 as well. The casting around the reinforcement for the bar studs is broken. As you can see on this one here, they're actually both chipped down because where they sit in behind is actually broke out. The 590 has one that's broken as well. That combined with the fuel heating issue means that the 55 could have been a far, far superior saw if it ever had gotten these top ends. So when we look close, this is what the impulse ground is supposed to look like. And this one, as you can kind of see, that is why this saw burnt down. It walked back out of the cylinder and it was no longer sealing. So like I said, these things had a pretty large issue with fuel boiling in the tank. And as you can see here, this is the expansion chamber. So the idea of this is that the fuel vapors would come in here, pool, and actually run back down to the tank. When then this is your actual breather line, comes out the top and goes in through another filter and then out. The Johnson Red has a totally different setup. It does kind of the same thing, but it has a piece down inside, and there's actually a passage inside these cases. You can see the little drain hole down here, and on it, the fuel that dropped out of suspension would actually run out the back of the saw. And for those reasons, plus the weak anti-vibe, these bar studs that like to break out, Husqvarna could have made a way better version of this saw on the 50, 51, 55 chassis. But I can understand not wanting to do that, because why did they need to when it fit the market that they wanted, and the 254 was the 50cc Pro Saw. Another thing interesting about this 325 is it's actually the only saw on this chassis that has a choke. I think the later 540 might have done this as well, but of the close port saws, this is the only one that got it choked. The rest of them have something built into the filter. Well, here goes nothing. Put a fresh carb kit in, dumped a prime down the carb, we got a full tank of gas. Let's see what happens. Well, had to skip ahead a couple of steps there. I got a little bit carried away working on it. It initially did not start. I ended up having to pull the carb off again. Pulled the carb apart, didn't really find anything, put it back together. I cut a chunk off the fuel line just in case, and, well, now we have a running saw.